Today we return to the Texas killing fields for part 3 of our series. The fields are a 25-acre stretch of land where 29 bodies were discovered over a span of 35 years. Today we'll be discussing 2 serial killers who got away with their crimes for decades. Brace yourselves because this is a rough one. Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by our Table of Disappointment. This is How They Got Away, the show where we discuss the unsatisfying endings to your favorite unsolved or unpunished true crime and corporate greed stories. I'm your host for today, Annalise. I am here with my co-host.
Hi, it's Kelsey.
And our guest.
Hello, it's me, Anna. Again, besties.
So yeah, we're coming back to part 3. We covered in the last one a couple who was sadly murdered and their baby who was alive decades later, Holly. One of the only bright spots in this entire thing.
Oh yeah, Holly.
And prior to that, in part 1, we discussed the 11 who went to heaven, the women that Edward Bell claimed to have killed. So we come back today to talk about a few other groups of girls, women. Some of these people are very young. To talk about 2 serial killers. Today we are going to start with the 4. These women were all found in like the same area of the Texas killing fields by Calder Road and were often at the time talked about together. They are also some of the main subjects in the Netflix docuseries entitled The Texas Killing Fields by Crime Scene. So to start us off for today, I'm going to start with the 17th victim found. Heidi Villarreal Faye. I am very sorry. It is an interesting last name.
How's it spelled?
Villa, Villa, RREAL. So it's like Villarreal?
Oh,
Villario.
Villario?
Yeah.
Sounds very elven. Villario Faye.
I think it's Italian.
It sounds very elven, though. Do you know what I mean? Because I think of Galadriel.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Heidi. Not to go off on a tangent. She's a very pretty
honor
name.
her indeed.
Heidi, 23 at the time, was a cocktail waitress working at a local bar called Texas Moon. She was a happy, fun-loving person in a very loving relationship, was close to her family, and those around her said that she was always willing to help. The way that she was described, she kind of sounds like an extrovert who had like a lot of friends and who was a very cheerful person.
How old did you say she was again?
23.
Oh.
That's man.
That's too close for comfort.
It is. I was gonna say that's literally just us.
Mm-hmm.
Me. No! Stop it!
That there's no good age to get murdered. There isn't, but there's something particularly about it when someone's like at the beginning of their adult life, they're really making their way in the world, they're putting down roots, they're finding their own community. That you're like, oh, fuck you, murderer, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Heidi went missing on October 10th, 1983, while walking back from the local gas station in League City, Texas. She had been staying with her parents and was going to use the payphone to call her boyfriend. A lot of these cases have included payphones, as you may have caught on.
Yeah, those are usually in more public areas too, because they're for public use. So it's interesting that those are where people are finding their victims. Although I guess you kind of want privacy for a call, so there's maybe no one else around.
The owner of the gas station had seen Heidi on the phone that night and said it was a very normal occurrence. She didn't seem scared or like anyone was following her at the time. But when Heidi hadn't returned for hours, her family went looking for her and eventually called the police. I believe again
When did she leave the house to make this call?
I'm not exactly sure what time.
But it was evening.
From my understanding.
Okay. So, I mean, you have to pay by the, not the minute, but you have to pay for time on a payphone, as I understand it. So, like, like we would have phone calls that would be an hour, but you're at home, you're on the home line, so it's not quite the same. But is it just like hours? I mean, I guess you're not really paying attention. You're kind of settling down for the night. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was also 23, so her family might have been like, she might have gone to do something, like she is a young adult. Many things.
That's true. We live in sort of a surveillance state where you can have like find my iPhone on your child's phone, or you can text them and be like, yo, are you going to be out of the house tonight? Like,
yeah,
it's definitely a different world where you just kind of assume people are going to be where they say they're going to be and whatnot.
It wasn't until 6 months later, on April 4th, 1984, when a woman discovered that her dog had come back to her house with a skull in its mouth.
Now, this is not the first time that this has happened in the Texas killing fields. I distinctly remember this story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've had another
case. People need to stop letting their dogs go free around here.
Or maybe they should let more dogs free. They're finding missing people.
I think we've said every single episode, they really should have like every 6 months, everybody just goes in the woods with a team of dogs and just like takes a look around.
So, of course, after this skull showed up, the police were called and the area was searched and Heidi's remains were found. She had been found.
Did they have the dog lead them back? Like, that's a lot of backtracking to do. Like, dogs run around. You just go, come on, Lassie.
I don't know.
Where'd you find it?
But Heidi had been found nude with broken ribs and blunt force trauma to the head, having been beaten to death with a club.
Oh.
She had also been raped.
Well, when you said she was unclothed, I feel that there was a certain
precedent.
There's an assumption. Yeah.
Now, there was another woman who went missing from the same convenience store as Heidi, who I'll discuss in a bit. Her name is Laura Miller. But just to talk about Heidi a little more, she was, of course, not treated nicely during the investigation, or should I say non-investigation, because that's what's happened with a lot of these cases. The police had kind of dismissed her as a hitchhiker, a cocktail waitress, a runaway. And her niece remarks that it was almost like they thought she wasn't worth the resources.
Why do they hate women so much? Stop.
It's Texas.
Oh, you're right. Still.
I feel I said what I wanted to say about that in previous parts. I don't think we need to get into that rant again. At least I'm not angry enough to start that rant for the third time. Yet.
So the next one I'm going to talk about is not a part of the 4 found, but within our timeline, her case is related to the 4 and was found within the Texas killing fields. It's that she was just brought together later. So I'm going to talk about her next, but just so we are clear, she's not considered part of the 4 from that era. So, Ellen Rae Simpson Beason, a very fun name, was 29 when she went missing in July 1984. At the time, she was living with her parents and brother in Friendswood, Texas. She had been at a bar called Texas Moon, the same one Heidi worked at, with her friend Candy, who introduced her to Clyde Hedrick. Clyde was working as a roofer at the time. There's a really big construction boom in the area. We talked about that with Tina and Clyde in the last one as well. He had come for the construction boom. A lot of people were coming to this area. So Clyde was attractive and a good dancer, which interested Ellen.
Those are my 2 standards.
She's like, this man's got moves. I love to dance. This is fun.
Honestly, this is not going to end well for her, but bring back dancing. It is a general rule. We should bring that back.
I see all those videos of like line dancing, for like, because it's really big in the South, but it's not in the North, and I kind of want to go line dancing.
Yeah, I would go line dancing.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we need to find a place to go line dancing.
Gotta go line dancing.
Anyway.
But also, like, keep in mind there could be murderers there, I guess.
Yeah, moving on. We're bringing it back down. We don't laugh and make light of the cases itself. We're just trying to get through the information. So, the next day, no one could find Ellen. Clyde said that Ellen had left with friends that night, not with him.
And we believe Clyde. 100%.
Candy.
Why would he lie?
Ellen's friend, Candy, knew that Ellen was hanging out with Clyde. And so she kept questioning him until one day he said, I'll show you where she is.
Oh, Candy!
And so he led her to a dirt road and went to a pile of trash where there was a sofa, where he lifted it up and showed her the discarded body of her friend. The sofa was by Old Causeway Road in Galveston, Texas, or in the Galveston County. And it had been by the water and the heat. And so she was decomposed to a skeleton.
Oh my God.
That is horrifying enough to see on its own. But the panic I would feel as Candy, because nobody shows you that with an intention of you just going about your life after that.
No.
Like, I'd expect to get killed. Is that what, like, did he attack her after this?
Clyde threatened to kill Candy if she told anyone, but he didn't act on it. I
mean, that's a gamble on his part. Like, it's a pretty horrifying sight. Maybe he thought he wouldn't have to kill her. But you already brought her. I don't want him to kill Candy, but you already brought her all the way out. And now you're like, I twisted my wrist.
From my understanding,
don't worry about it, girly pop.
Of this man, and we'll talk about this later, he seems to think that he has enough power in these situations that it's enough.
There it is.
And I will say, it did take Candy another 6 months to go to police.
Oh,
I get it though. Like, that is horrifying.
Yeah.
And that, it is effective. Like, he brought her all the way out. Like, he showed her, like, I can hide you here. Nobody's looking for your friend. No one's going to find you here either if I put you here. Mm-hmm. Like, I get it.
So on July 29th, a year after Ellen's disappearance, police were led to her body. As mentioned before, her body was bones at this point, but she still had the necklace that she wore that night.
Aww.
Clyde, who was of course questioned after this, would claim that Ellen drowned after they had gone skinny dipping in a lake nearby. And he comes up with this whole story about how, I brought her into the truck and I was going to drive to the hospital, but then I got worried about being suspicious and questioned, so I put her underneath this sofa on the side of the road.
Yeah, it was an accident.
What? How is that any better?
It was an accident, Clyde. That's why you buried her in the trash like she was garbage. That really says that you feel really bad about this. Poor Clyde.
No, yeah, that's way more suspicious. I'd rather be the number one suspect if I bring someone who is critically hurt, hypothetically, to the hospital. I'd rather someone be like, did you kill this bitch? And I'd be like, no. Why would I bring him here? That's stupid of me. Crazy.
I never understand that logic, because that's like not exclusive to this, of people being like, oh, I was scared of, getting in trouble. And it's like, yeah, man, but now you're on the hook for even in real accident situations where they hide it and try to cover it up. Like, an accident, manslaughter, is so much less prison time than murder, which is now what you're on the hook for.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, the forethought.
Because of everything that had happened, her cause of death initially could not be determined.
Yeah.
And it would take until 2012 when it was ruled that she had died from several skull fractures. And we'll get back to that. But we're going to stay in the timeline for a bit.
Okay. I do find it interesting that, because, you know, when the flesh is desiccated and it's only the bones, if what happened was something that was like a flesh wound or they bled out, like it would be really difficult to ascertain that from just the bones. But it's interesting to me that there were injuries to the skull itself, and they couldn't determine that, or maybe they couldn't determine exactly which one had. I don't know. That's interesting to me that they couldn't figure that one out. But
I think it's also
I
like
also didn't see the skull fractures.
determine when it happened.
Yeah, it could have been a matter of like predation or the couch on top of her that they weren't sure if it was peri or post-mortem.
But anyway, back to our timeline. So during this time, Clyde couldn't be charged with anything beyond abuse of a corpse for disposing of her body. So he was fined $2,000 and got a year in prison.
What? Yes. That for sure, yes. Can't you also charge them with not reporting a crime? Or like an accident? Like, isn't that a thing? Or maybe it wasn't a thing back then.
I don't know. But of course, at this time, with everything going on, police started to kind of have an inkling, like maybe Clyde could have been related to Heidi somehow. Like it's from like the same bar, like da da da. They weren't sure though. We'll come back to what happened in 2012 and all of this later. And we're going to move back to the 4.
Here we are again.
So the next victim, Laura Miller, the one found near Heidi, or in the same area as Heidi. Laura Miller was 16 when she went missing on September 10th, 1984. She went missing a little less than a year after Heidi.
Right, and we talked about these two in part 1, right? No. I'm making connections where none exist. Don't worry.
There's too many people.
There are so many people.
There do be a lot of people.
Yeah.
We need like a board with like red string.
Yeah, and there's some repeat names in here too.
The camera,
which makes it a bit confusing.
Okay, carry on then.
So Laura had been a high school student in League City, Texas at the time. That evening, she had asked her mom to drop her off at a payphone so that she could like call her boyfriend. They just moved to the area. They didn't have a phone set up yet at their house. And so her mother was originally going to wait, but she had to like go to work. So she was like, okay, we're not that far from home. So if you want to keep talking to your boyfriend, like you can walk home, but I've got to go. Seems like a very normal thing considering that their home was only a half a mile away.
Yeah, that's not far.
Okay. It's not so bad.
She would disappear on that walk home.
Of course. And is this the same payphone? I can't imagine there's that many payphones in this area. Yep.
So later that day, her father and mother would like notice that she was still not back yet. And her boyfriend later showed up and they like also didn't know like where she was. And they were very concerned because Laura had seizures and took Dilatin twice a day. So her family initially thought that, oh my God, what if she had a seizure while walking home? The panic. So they searched all of the local hospitals and she wasn't at any of them. So they went to the police. And the police labeled her as a runaway right away, to the frustration of her parents.
Come on.
I have to remind myself that this happened some 40 odd years ago and that we're a little bit better today. I have to believe that we're better today. But I want to punch somebody in the face. I want to punch somebody in the face so bad. What about that? What about that says runaway? I'm half a mile from home. I have a seizure disorder. I don't have my medication. I'm going to run away. And even if I did run away, I don't have my seizure medication that I need twice a day. I definitely do not need any sort of help. Don't come looking. I'm not gonna rant again. I'm holding it in. She's like, hold me back.
Laura Miller would be found in the same area as Heidi. In fact, she was only 60 feet away, near Calder Road on
Oh my God.
February 2nd, 1986, when a group of boys biking spotted her.
Oh, so she like maybe a shallow grave that got unearthed by animals or the weather, but not really hidden.
Another victim, Audrey Lee Cook, would be found meters away on the same day. And we'll talk about her later.
Okay, so that's two people, putting this third one aside for the moment because we haven't gotten into it yet. Two people who went missing from the same gas station, from the same payphone, were found right next to each other. Has anybody looked into this gas station owner?
No.
I'm just saying.
I mean,
like, it could be a guy just using that as a hunting ground. Could also be the guy who works there using it as a hunting ground. Because you know what? Then he could just say, yeah, she left. You can trust me, police. I am an adult white man.
See, that's logical. But remember, Kelsey, they were like, they're runaways. That would be smart. But again, they were like, they ran away. Silly goose. Like, why should we bother looking for them? That's so goofy and silly. Why would we do our jobs?
So at the scene, there was a blue checkered shirt found near Laura, which was originally packed away for evidence, but it was later destroyed.
What?
I said I wasn't gonna rant. I'm retracting that.
No, go.
What do you mean it was destroyed? An entire shirt was just not lost, not misplaced. You fucking destroyed it? How'd that happen? Huh? Motherfucker, are you in on it? I have to assume somebody on the police force is in on it at that point. Because what? How do you do that? You can't just do that. What?
Oh God, what if they did?
Probably. I mean, they're labeling all these women as runaways. Like, sure, maybe a couple of them, there's not a whole lot of evidence to say they were abducted, so you could maybe label them as runaways. But all of them, and also when you consider the fact that there are so many missing young women in this area over the course of time, you're not putting that together? I thought your job was to be a detective, sir. Like, there's one specific man I'm mad at. It's so many people I'm mad at.
You
specifically.
There's my finger.
The police weren't able to determine her cause of death due to decomposition.
Only we're in. They couldn't figure that out.
Of course.
I'm mad at that. It could be either at this point because the shirt thing kills me because now I'm like, could you not figure it out because of the time you didn't have the forensic sciences available, you didn't have the resources, or are you in on it?
Of course, her father, Tim Miller, blames the police for the lack of evidence and inability to recover her cause of death due to them not looking for her. He's like, if you found her when we said that she was missing, then maybe you'd have some more to go off of. But no, instead, you decided to twiddle your thumbs while my daughter was gone.
And the thing about so many of these cases is that from the sound of it, like, these were murders that happened within hours of their abduction. The likelihood that even if the police had mounted a full-fledged search immediately, that they would have found them alive is unlikely. But also, the evidence that you would have uncovered, invaluable. Also, the shirt! Man, what little evidence you did have! Did they ever expound on how the shirt was? I'm not letting it go. How did you destroy a shirt?
I don't know. I read, or I was watching, actually, this was from the Netflix documentary, because I didn't even know about the search until I watched the documentary. And they were like, oh yeah, a bunch of evidence was missing and destroyed, including the shirt.
I have to assume they're in on it. Like, I have to assume somebody paid them to destroy evidence and to stop looking.
We're coming back.
Or that somebody within the force is causing this and is doing stuff within the force to make sure these people aren't found. I have to assume that at this point.
We gotta come back. So.
Fine, but I'm still mad.
As you should be.
We're back to Clyde Hedrick. He lived only a few doors down from the Millers. And at one point, Mr. Miller even thinks that he had helped him with the tire and was like, oh, like he was like having issues with his car. Mr. Miller went and got a tire, brought it to him and goes like, oh, you don't owe me anything. Like, you look like a hardworking man. Like, just take it. It's been a rough day for you. Mr. Miller also, and I call him Mr. Miller because I have respect for Tim Miller. So he gets to be
I
called
have
Mr.
mad
Miller.
respect for Tim Miller.
So
not Mr. Miller.
He also said that one of Laura's friends that he still talked to after Laura's death had mentioned that they used to walk the long way around the neighborhood because Laura was scared of Clyde.
So hang on. Laura had just moved to this area with her family, right? Like they'd recently moved?
They used to live.
Oh, they used to live.
It's like in the same area from my understanding.
Okay, so they like moved, in the same town, but a few streets over or whatever. But okay, so she had likely had enough weird interactions with this guy that she was like, I don't even want to walk past his house.
Yeah.
And the family didn't mention that obviously he was not the reason that they moved, because Mr. Miller was like, he seemed chill, he seemed fine.
Like he didn't even know that they were walking the long way around.
Oh, but like, why didn't you say anything, girl? Why didn't you say anything to your parents?
So we'll come back to Laura and Clyde later. But I do want to give a shout out to Tim Miller. He was interviewed in the Netflix documentary.
Correct.
Yeah, he was interviewed in the Netflix documentary he's heavily focused on. So if you want to hear more about his experience, you can listen to that. He founded EquiSearch, which helps find missing people. And we mentioned it in the Fort Worth Trio case.
Oh my God, what a connection. That's so fun. Well, it's not fun, but it's like these people helping each other.
Yeah, it initially started as people going out on horseback and searching, but it has expanded dramatically to literally aircrafts, radar, boats, drones, and ATVs. They have worked on 2,533 cases, found 436 people alive, and found 341 deceased.
That is unfortunate, but it's so much better that they found them, because as we discussed in the Fort Worth case, it's so much worse when you can't find anything. Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Mm-hmm. And I remember we talked about this because I was like, oh, that's such like cowboy frontier justice kind of vibes.
Yeah, this man never quits. It's both sad and inspiring because he does a lot of work with helping others. And as we talk about some later cases, him and his company, as this goes on, are just involved in a lot of things. Like he goes out searching for these girls when they go missing. He brings his like EquiSearch to come and like search the areas. Like this man is involved.
That's nice. That is a little silver lining in this horribly dark cloud.
Yeah.
So moving on to another one of the four. This is the third one of the four. Audrey Lee Cook. Audrey Lee Cook, 30, was a mechanic who lived in the Houston area. Originally, she was from Memphis, Texas, and Audrey moved to live with her girlfriend in 1976.
Now, when you say girlfriend, are we talking about the 80s definition of a girlfriend, where you're like best friends and also girls? Or
from my understanding, an actual girlfriend.
Good for you, girl. In Texas in the 80s? Get it. Oh, it's also like...
Wow, out here being a girl boss as a mechanic and having a girlfriend. Slay. That's very nice.
She was well liked by most, thought of as a kind and generous person. However, there were some that claimed that she was involved in drug dealing and use. But I have no evidence for that.
The rumor mills are grinding.
Part of me wonders if that's like a homophobia thing, but that's also like very specific.
Yeah.
Maybe there was something. I don't know.
But Audrey had been communicating with her family back in Tennessee through letters and then later emails. Her last email was sent around December 15th, 1985.
Email back in 1985.
Yeah. So neither her family nor those she knew in Texas had any idea where she went. I'm not sure if she still lived with her girlfriend at the time, since
I was going to say, where's her girlfriend in all this?
There wasn't any mention of her, so I really don't know. Her family would come down with to Texas, and along with a group of local volunteers, searched the area and came up with nothing. Audrey would be found on February 2nd, 1986, and at the time was considered a Jane Doe, and it would take until 2019 for her to be identified thanks to genetic genealogy. So for the majority of this, she is just Jane Doe.
That's gotta be.
Oh my god.
I don't know if it's worse, but it's a special kind of hell when you find out years and years and years later that the person that you thought you would never find, maybe still holding on to the hope that they were still alive somewhere, has been found but unknown for so many years because they'd been so decomposed, or so their body had been so desecrated that you can't even identify them. That's got to be its own special hell, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Her body was hidden from plain sight, but it was not buried. Due to decomposition, the cause of death could not be explicitly determined, but it is believed to be blunt force trauma, and it seemed like she did have some kind of small gunshot wound, but it's not determined whether that was what caused the death exactly.
Definitely seeing some patterns with the other two at this point.
So she had also had some healed fractures on her fourth and fifth ribs, which does raise the question about whether she had been caught up in something prior to her death, because they had started to heal. They had healed.
Do they know like how long it had been?
They don't. They just know that they had been healed.
Not me Googling a rib cage to figure out which ones are the fourth or the fifth ribs right now. Okay, so it's like right in the middle of the chest. Like right in front of the heart, I guess.
Audrey's death is currently unsolved.
Because there's definitely some similarities with like shallow or no graves, being beaten with the other of the four we've covered so far. But the age is definitely a discrepancy, and the maybe a gunshot wound.
Unfortunately, her family had very little idea about who she was associated with at the time. And on top of not having her body identified for so long, the investigation was seriously hampered. Detectives did wonder if drug dealing was a part of it, but they quickly ruled it out. So they really don't have anything to go on.
Because I have to ask the question because it was like the 80s and it was also in the South and they are not well known for being very accepting. Did they not question the girlfriend properly due to homophobia? Did they assume she was like a roommate and not someone who would be that close? Where was she? Like what? She doesn't seem to be mentioned at all unless she got like lumped in with like the friends that they questioned.
I don't know. Moving on to the final victim of the four is Donna Prudhomme, who was known as Janet Doe until 2019. So Donna and Audrey were known as Jane and Janet Doe until 2019. Donna was a mother of two sons who had lived most of her 34 years of life in Port Arthur, Texas. She was married but had been separated from her husband, who had become abusive.
Okay. I have a thinky thought, but I'm going to hold it until you talk about the state of her body, I think.
She took the children with her when she left, but eventually arranged for them to live with their grandparents. So she left them with them. And then Donna's family had last heard from her at the end of 1989 when she asked Diane, her sister, to mail her birth certificate to Clear Lake, where she was currently living. Her last known whereabouts placed her as living in Nassau Bay in 1991, specifically July 1991. There are no employment records for her, but she was known to frequent local bars. According to one of her sons, and the article I read said her only surviving son, He thought that she had just moved on with her life. Completely detached from the family and just went to live her own life.
That's kind of sad, but unfortunately, that is a thing, though.
It is.
Yeah.
Which is,
Her body was found on September 8th, 1991, an estimated 6 weeks after she had died, by two people riding horses around the same area on Calder Road that the other three were found, 5 years after the other three were found. She was badly decomposed, so an exact cause of death could not be determined. However, she did have an upper spinal injury. As mentioned at the time, she was unidentified and labeled as Janet Doe. The Lee City Police did not collect DNA evidence well, so there wasn't anything that they could do with it at the time. So, like any kind of prints that would have been left, any evidence of who the perpetrator could have been via DNA was not collected and preserved well.
When you say an upper spinal injury, like, could they not determine gunshot versus blunt force trauma?
They couldn't determine anything, so I really don't know. The only note that they made was that it was an upper spinal injury.
Okay, so she'd only been dead 6-ish weeks. Yeah, the body can decompose pretty heavily in that time, depending on conditions. But, like, you couldn't
we have to also remember that this is a wet and hot part of Texas. This is July.
Yeah.
So
that's
both
true.
The humidity and the heat really accelerate decomposition. Not that I'm saying that things couldn't have been done better either way, but that is also a fact.
My thing with it, though, is like the spinal injury is like a skeletal thing. So, like,
yes.
What happened there? Is the forensic anthropologist down there just not very good? What's going on with that? Or maybe it just was a nick. I don't know. But also, like, the DNA thing, in fairness to the Texas police force, as fair as I can be to them at this point, DNA was only like 5-10 years old, like, being really seriously used. But also they had been collecting DNA knowing that it could one day be helpful for many years before that. So that's a little embarrassing. Texas police force, what happened to securing a crime scene and collecting evidence? Or would it just have been destroyed with the shirt? My thinky thought was that, oh my God, what was her name? We were just talking about her, the 29-year-old. Audrey, thank you. Audrey and Donna are, like, similar in age, whereas the other two are also similar in age. Maybe there's something there. Also, it's really hard to say if they have similar methods of killing because there's so little information about.
But we do have to keep in mind,
we don't know their causes of death.
There's a 5-year gap between them.
That was my next point, is like, that's a hell of a cool down period. Even if you group all 4 of them together, there's like 1, 2, 3, and then 5 years later 4. Maybe they were in, like, if you are saying all 4 of them are done by the same perpetrator, that's a hell of a cooling down period. Maybe they were in prison for that time, and maybe they like aged, so maybe they're victim type aged, although Audrey was closer to the other two, and she was 29. I don't know. It's really, I get why they're grouping them in terms of location.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see the argument for the first 2, definitely. Maybe Audrey. I don't know. Other than that, it's just we don't have enough evidence for the last 2.
Yeah. There was a man named Mark Roland Stallings who had claimed to have killed Janet Doe during an interview with author Catherine Casey. Mark was serving 2 life sentences and was claiming that Janet was a teenage prostitute that he picked up at a hotel on Telephone Road. He claimed to have strangled her with a seatbelt, and he told the same tale to different people multiple times. However, we know that Janet was, in fact, not a teenage prostitute, and there really wasn't any evidence to say he actually did it. It sounded like he was just kind of claiming it.
Probably. But I am going to say, with what we know about this Texas killing field, there is a chance that he murdered somebody who did fit that description and buried her in that area and got confused when somebody got dug up and he was like, oh, I assumed it was mine. Whoops, it was somebody else's. You know how it is, us serial killers. We really need to organize. We get our wires crossed all the time. It sounds more like he's trying to like sensationalize himself, be like, oh, like the next Jeffrey Dahmer, like Night Stalker, some other serial killer.
Yeah.
Bullshit. But there's a chance that that was true, I'm going to say, with the amount of bodies that exist in this Texas killing field that we know about.
Let's move on to suspects for the four. Originally, Robert Abel, a former NASA scientist, had been identified by the FBI as a suspect for the killing of the four girls, Heidi, Jessica, Audrey, and Donna, who were Jane and Janet Doe at the time.
Okay. How'd they make that connection?
His ex-wives had accused him of abuse and abusing animals on his farm as well. He lived in the area, and overall, he was a suspicious person because of his violent tendencies, supposed violent tendencies. When the police investigated his home, they found weird things. They found human teeth.
Okay, but I do have a bag in my house with my wisdom teeth in it, so, like, there could be an explanation. Like, if you say it like that, it sounds suspicious. There could be, like, if he has children, maybe those are baby teeth. I don't want to defend this man. It sounds like he's a real piece of work, but, like, there could be. I'm really defending me for having human teeth in my house.
Okay, but that one's easy. Like, you don't hide that you have your wisdom teeth. You've told a lot of people. Like, remember the Vendo?
I do.
Vendor at that one steampunk expo? You were like, yeah, my sister is going to put my wisdom teeth in a couple of dice. And she was like, that's very slay. So you're pretty open about that. I don't think he was open about that.
We don't know if he was hiding it or not.
He might have been.
They also found a gun that would have been similar to the one used on Audrey. Was it Audrey who had the gunshot wound? I'm sorry, I'm getting confused.
Yes, it was her.
No, you're here for that. It was Audrey.
But there was
no, go ahead.
There was nothing that concretely tied him to the girls. There was no. They had this kind of image of who this perpetrator would be. And they thought he would be someone who would gather trophies. And there was no trophies at Robert's house. So there was no evidence. There was nothing. So the police moved on.
I kind of understand why they would, though, because, like, with Audrey, they said it was maybe a gunshot wound. They weren't even, like, positive it was. So in determining, like, ballistics for that, you can't really be sure about the gauge of the weapon.
Yeah.
And also, it is Texas. Everybody has at least one gun. I'm being grossly general, of course, but it is also Texas in the 80s, and it sounds like he has a farm, so of course he has at least one gun. That's not really suspicious on its own. It doesn't sound like they ran ballistics to see if it had been fired recently. And yeah, he's a piece of shit, but you can't just arrest somebody for being a piece of shit. The human teeth thing is potentially weird, but could have, as we've established, could have an explanation.
Okay, we're moving on. I will say, this is one thing, Tim Miller kind of became obsessive about this. Tim Miller, the guy we like, he unfortunately did become very obsessed with the idea that Robert Abel could have killed his daughter. Understandably. The police weren't doing anything.
Yeah.
The FBI are like, this guy. They announced this was the suspect. And then there was nothing. And so he did pursue Robert heavily, like left phone mail, like, oh my God, voicemail messages.
Phone mail?
Shut up. Voicemail messages that were pretty threatening. He like looked around like the perimeter of this guy's property, and eventually Robert had to put a restraining order out on him.
I understand. No, that was somebody else.
That was someone else.
God, right. Just a lot of pieces of shit in the same area. I understand why Tim Miller would. I understand.
Yes.
The impulse. It was wrong. And also, unfortunately, this dude was in the right for putting a restraining order on Tim. It's not a good situation all around. The thing with it, though, is that, like, yeah, you say, like, there's nothing to connect him to these victims, but that's, like, what makes it difficult, is that
Mhm.
the likelihood is that these serial killers didn't have a connection to their victims. That's why serial killers can get away with it for so long, is that it's about victim type or method of killing. It's not about being emotionally attached or connected to the victim at all. And also, I feel like it's important to mention, like, profiling was pretty new at this point, right? Like, profiling didn't emerge until the late 80s, so it's possible that if you were to try to run a profile for a person who would commit these murders today, the profile you get could be a little different.
Just to wrap up, a note on Robert. Robert had become a social pariah in his community because everyone was convinced that it was this guy
Yeah.
now because he was the only suspect named, and he was named by the FBI. So
He sounds like a piece of shit anyway.
he eventually moved away back to his parents' farm, and then in 2005, he died after being hit by a train while driving his golf cart, and it is possible that it was suicide.
Yeah. By the way, just for point of clarification, FBI profiling started in the 70s, not the 80s, but still, like, it was still relatively new.
So, who else could be a suspect for the four? Have any guesses?
I have one.
Now, class, what is our guess?
What is Clyde for 400?
Ding!
Double Jeopardy.
So, as mentioned before, Clyde was connected to Ellen and then Laura in some way because they had lived in the same neighborhood. Clyde had a history of being a terrible guy.
Who is surprised? It's not me.
According to his ex stepdaughter, Marla, I believe it's his ex stepdaughter, he exposed himself to her, would peek in through a hole to her bedroom, and also sexually assaulted her in her sleep.
You really buried the lead on that one, Annalise. Jesus Christ.
Clyde had done time in Florida for various crimes and was accused by his ex wives and girlfriends of being abusive. Marla says, according to her mother, one time Clyde came home with a bloody knife and told her, I did it again.
A lot of pieces of shit in this small area. Okay. Okay, so the exposing himself to his stepdaughter makes me wonder if perhaps Laura was avoiding his house because he maybe exposed himself to her from, like, the window or something. Like, that seems a little too connecty for me to not be a connection.
While Clyde had been charged for abuse of a corpse, he got away for many, many years without punishment. In 2012, I repeat again, 2012, the police formed an ad hoc task force to look into Ellen Beason's death. In 2012, they exhumed her body and, like we discussed, uncovered her cause of death, the multiple skull fractures. This was finally enough evidence to charge Clyde for Ellen's murder.
This really makes me wonder about the coroner that was active at the time in this area. Like, skull fractures are not like sneaky things. They're usually pretty obvious.
Marla, the ex stepdaughter, spoke up at the trial for Ellen Beason. She had actually gone with her mother to report the abuse that she had had after her mother finally separated from Clyde back in, I think it was the 90s. And the police just kind of sat on that. And then
Of course.
when this came around with Ellen Beason, they were like, Marla can attest that Clyde is a fucked up individual. And she was like, I'll do it. She came to the
Good for
trial and
Marla.
talked about the abuse that she experienced from Clyde. And in 2014, Clyde got the maximum sentence of 20 years for Ellen's death.
Good. Well, honestly, is there a statute of limitations on murder? There's no statute of limitations on murder, right?
No, but I think you also have to go by the laws at the time.
True.
While in jail, informants said that Clyde admitted to having sex and then killing Laura Miller and also admitting to killing Hyde. But according to Texas law at the time, a person cannot be convicted on the basis of jailhouse informants.
Also, just for the record, quote unquote, having sex. I'm not sure about that, bestie.
Right. Sexual assault.
Yeah. I do occasionally love me some jailhouse justice.
Unfortunately, Clyde would continue to get away with Laura and Heidi's murders since so much time had passed, and a lot of the evidence was missing or destroyed. As mentioned, in 2019, 2 of the 4, the Jane and Janet Does, who were later identified as Donna and Audrey, were identified in 2019. Previously, the police thought that they were transient people, which wasn't true. They thought they were
the way they just assumed that because they couldn't immediately identify them and didn't want to look into it.
Yep.
Interesting.
There are no suspects in their cases. Even though they were kind of clumped together with Jessica Kane and Ella Beason, there wasn't anything that connected them to Clyde, and so Audrey and Donna are kind of taken out of the equation for Clyde.
Damn. I mean, like we were kind of saying, like hers doesn't really fit in with the first 2.
In 2021, Clyde was released on parole. He had served 8 years, and there was a technicality that he was released on. It was a mandatory release. I don't know what that technicality was, but he had to be released.
What? Here's the thing. Like, either the system has to work or it doesn't. You can't just make an exception for one guy. Like, you have to work within the rules of the system. But also, how do we get here? There are lawyers that are part of the system, and not a one of you saw this technicality? Kind of your job is technicalities.
In 2022, Tim Miller won a lawsuit against Clyde for the wrongful death of his daughter and won the case for $24 million in liability and damages. And he originally filed this in 2014, so it took a very long time.
Though civil suits take ages. The thing about it, though, is as impressive of a number as $24 million is, there's no way he's going to see any of that ever.
Yeah.
But I feel like it sets the precedent of, like, we as a society know that you did this and know that you've caused irreparable harm to this family.
Yes. Here is a quote from the time from Tim. I filed the wrongful death suit to let Clyde Hedrick know that, Clyde, I'm still here. I am still here, and I am not going to quit until the day I die.
The monumental Herculean restraint it has to take this man to not bring some frontier fucking justice to Clyde now that he's out is truly impressive.
He is in like a halfway house, and there were, at the time, they literally did like news reports where like Marla and Tim, because Marla and Tim and Mr. Miller like talk together, along with Heidi's family, all like stood across the street from that halfway house and like urged the public, like the system, to detain this man again.
I understand that, and I understand it, but like, what are you going to detain him on?
And also,
you can't charge him with murder a second time. That's true. You should warn the public. I would honestly, I'd get in trouble for stalking, because I'd be like calling anytime I saw he had a new job. I would call him the place of work and be like, "Hi, did you know the person that you hired murdered my child? Did you know that about that?"
That is just like what Tim Miller did with Robert Abel.
Yeah, literally the same thing. I'm picturing him, cowboy hat on a horse, on a hill with the sunset going down, with like a hawk going, and like a dust, one of those little like tumbleweeds is tumbling, and he like looks at him and like, "I'm coming for you."
And I have to say,
from like outside the halfway house.
in the documentary, he is wearing a cap that's like the Lone Star State like hat.
Yes.
So he's very much like a Texas guy, and he is an older guy. And they're talking about, this author is also part of the docu series, and was talking about, yeah, Tim's getting up there in years, but he, when they're digging, still jumps down into the like holes and digs as well. Like, he's an older guy, but he's still going for it.
Honestly, Clyde is lucky to be alive. I'm gonna say that. He is alive due to Tim's mercy. And that's it.
So, because this has gone on for so long, I think I'm going to have to split this episode that I thought was just going to be part 3 and that we were going to finish
4 parts.
In part 3, I think that we are going to have to do 4, because I want to give time and justice to the rest of these cases, and I don't want to rush through them because I feel like we don't have enough time. So next part, we are going to move back away from the 4 and get back into the timeline, and so we'll be starting up again in 1996. But that is for part 4.
Join us next week where we find out it's actually 5 parts.
It's not. I've finished writing this. I've finished writing it. There's nothing more I can write. I am not going to add to this. I'm telling myself this, and it is going to be fun. I need to. This is very sad and very frustrating. And like, yeah, we laugh a lot in this because we're trying to get through it and like make it palatable, but it's a lot, y'all.
If we didn't, it would be a terrible slog of bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. And like, how do you get through that?
But I think we need to talk about these people, and especially people like Tim Miller, and we'll talk about later. There is another family, Laura Smither. Their kids have the same name, who also was unfortunately killed. And this like group comes together, and I think we really have to highlight some of the bright spots in this, and kind of, and I think always make fun of the killers, because they don't deserve any respect. They deserve to be made fun of and laughed at because they are awful and they suck.
Exactly. But save it for part 4.
Saving it for part 4. Similar for the other parts, I did imagine that actually, you know what? I'm kind of imagining our table, Tim Miller's Equisearch company, like the nonprofit, has an office. And so I'm kind of imagining us there with Tim Miller.
We're just in the office. There's like a map. We're looking it over.
He literally, during the documentary, they like show like maps where like him and his like coworkers are like looking at these maps in different areas that they're searching, in different places where things could be happening, and like print them out. And it's crazy. There's other details that I did not talk about because I think they should stay in the documentary. I don't want to take too much information from that. But it was a very good documentary. It was very well put together, and I did really appreciate hearing from Marla, who suffered all that abuse from Clyde and is finally able to speak her truth, and Tim Miller, who does a lot.
Doing the damn thing. And then if you squint in the back of the docuseries, there's us at a table with some maps. So that's where we're at.
Anyway, that is where we're going to end for today. Push in your chair, please stay safe, and we'll see you guys in part 4.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.